The Opium Wars were an influential conflict in the 9th century between China and the Western powers, particularly the British Empire, with far-reaching consequences for Asian history and geopolitics. China, under the Qing dynasty, pursued a policy of commercial isolation at the beginning of the 19th century, only permitting a small volume of foreign trade to occur on its territory, mainly in the port of Guangzhou, in present-day Canton. China had highly sought-after products in the West, such as tea, silk, and porcelain, but no interest in Western goods, which created a significant trade imbalance. To redress this balance, British merchants started smuggling Indian-produced opium into China. For millennia, opium, a substance obtained from the poppy flower, had been used for its medicinal and recreational properties. When smoked or ingested, opium produces a state of euphoria, relaxation, and pain relief, being especially appealing in an environment where drudgery and poverty were widespread. Smoking opium began to spread among the Chinese population, ranging from peasants to civil servants and intellectuals. Opium is highly addictive. Once individuals used the drug, the addiction often spiraled out of control, ultimately leading to a dependency that wiped out entire families and communities. A growing need for more opium fed the addiction, fueled by a constant and growing demand, further perpetuating the cycle of dependency. Opium abuse in China rose rapidly, resulting in a public health and economic crisis. The Chinese government tried to stamp out the opium trade in response, leading in 1839 to Imperial Commissioner Lin Zexu ordering the crushing of more than 20,000 boxes of opium that had been seized by the British in Guangzhou. This angered the British, who viewed the opium trade as vital to their economy. Chinese armed forces attacked British ships near the Kowloon Peninsula, at the mouth of the Pearl River, in September 1839. The British warded off the attack with their naval superiority, sparking the First Opium War. Their military superiority, bolstered by modern warships and innovative tactics, quickly proved decisive. The British, led by Captain Charles Elliot, stormed the Chinese fortress at Chuanbi, a strategic point at the entrance to the Pearl River, in January 1841. The Chinese defenses quickly fell to the British artillery and superior tactics. The Convention of Chuanbi was signed after the battle, which included the cession of Hong Kong to the British, but it was not immediately implemented. The British fleet sailed up the Yangtze River, or Yangtze River, in July 1842, capturing several cities along the way, including Zhenjiang. This showed the Qing government's inability to defend its territory, and ultimately led to the Chinese surrender at the Treaty of Nanjing, the first in a series of agreements in which the Chinese would later refer to as unequal treaties. The Treaty of Nanjing was catastrophic for China. It forced China to hand over Hong Kong to the British. 5 ports, including Shanghai and Canton, were open to British trade. China was also obliged to settle a hefty sum of compensation with Britain. British merchants were given the right of extraterritoriality, which meant they were not subject to Chinese law. These humiliating conditions undermined the power of the Qing dynasty and fueled popular discontent. Dissatisfaction with the terms of the Treaty of Nanjing resulted in new tensions. An incident in 1856 involved the British ship Arrow, which had been boarded by Chinese authorities, provided the British with the pretext to start a new conflict. France, which also had business interests in China, sided with Britain in the conflict. British and French forces, allied against China, stormed Canton in December 1857. The city was taken after heavy bombardment and street fighting. Imperial Commissioner Ye Mingchen ended up in captivity and was sent into exile in India. As negotiations collapsed and Western diplomats were attacked, British and French forces decided to push onto Beijing. Anglo-French troops captured and looted the Summer Palace, a culturally significant imperial complex, in October 1860. This attack came in retaliation for the kidnapping and torture of Western diplomats and marked one of the most symbolically humiliating events for China. Following the capture of the Summer Palace, the Allied forces rushed to Beijing. With no ability to protect itself, the Chinese government resorted to negotiation. The Convention of Peking, or Beijing, was signed in October 1860, putting an end to the war and laying further concessions and humiliations on China, including the legalization of the opium trade and the granting of more territories. Further Chinese ports were open to foreign trade and the opium business was legalized. Christian missions were authorized to freely run, and China was forced to surrender more territory and pay reparations. The Opium Wars left a devastating toll on China. Besides territorial and economic losses, it significantly weakened its central government, leading to an unstable period that ended in several uprisings, such as the Taiping Rebellion between 1850 and 1864. The Qing dynasty never fully recovered, and wars through China opened to colonial exploitation by several foreign powers, including Britain, France, Germany, Japan, and Russia. These developments also prompted China's self-strengthening initiative, an attempt to modernize its armed forces and economy. These reforms, however, were belated and inadequate to avoid the final collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1912. After the First Opium War, Hong Kong was ceded to the British, becoming a British colony and evolving in a distinct way from the rest of China, as it was influenced by Western laws and systems. The return of Hong Kong to China in 1997, after more than 150 years of British rule, is closely tied to the lingering effects of the Opium Wars. The city is still a major source of contention in Chinese-UK relations, and between Hong Kong and the Chinese central government. A footprint of the Opium Wars still rings through contemporary China. It is remembered as a symbol of domestic humiliation and the dawn of the century of humiliation, a period in which China was repeatedly subjugated by foreign powers. This emotion had been a driving force behind modern Chinese nationalism and its policies to rebuild and strengthen the country on the international stage. The Opium Wars not only changed China, but also set a turning point in Western-Eastern relations, ushering into a new era of Western domination in Asia that would last well into the 20th century.